How's everybody doing today? Early session.
You're streaming.
Actually, we're not streaming apparently. We're being recorded so people can watch later. So it's kind of beta versus new internet technology, beta. But that's okay, because people will be able to watch later. I tweeted out that people can tweet me questions, but I'll have to get them on my phone because the internet's really slow, and so as much as I tried to get TweetDeck to load, it wouldn't on my computer, so you'll get to see a pretty picture of the Cinque Terre. So I'm Jeff Wood, and I'm the New Media Director and Chief Cartographer at Reconnecting America in the Center for Transit-Oriented Development. I also operate a blog called The Overhead Wire and tweet at The Overhead Wire. We've been doing this session for about, 7 years? 7 years, Kathy? Kathy's been with me the whole time, and it's been great. But we started out teaching people how to use RSS readers, and now RSS is kind of dying because Google Readers is gone. So, it's changed a whole lot since we started. So, but today we're going to talk about agencies and bloggers and alternative media. And it's going to be interesting because we have a great panel. I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves in a second, but I'm just going to kind of let you guys know how I do this session each year, which is awesome. The reason why is because, as you see, you're going to see a pretty picture of the Cinque Terre instead of boring PowerPoint slides. So we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of these guys after they introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a discussion with everybody in the room. So get your questions ready, and we'll have 40 minutes to talk instead of just 2 in every other session that you've probably gone to this weekend or this week. So without further ado, I'd like to start. And we're going to get some orca blasts too. It's only fitting for Seattle. I should do this. So I'm going to start with Matt Johnson from Seattle Transit, and then I'll let you guys go from right to left.
So, Matt Johnson,
The other Matt Johnson.
The other Matt Johnson.
Or the original, I don't know.
The transit blogs about Washington. But so I am the newest editor at Seattle Transit Blog. I am new to the whole blogging thing. Actually, I was a commenter for years on STB, and then recently got asked to start writing, and I was writing some guest posts, and then I wrote a lot, which is good. And so they asked me to step up and write even more, and so that's basically about it. I enjoy it. I've never done anything like it before, and hopefully I'm getting better as time goes on.
I'm Martin Duke. I'm originally from the DC area, moved here to the Seattle area in about 1997. In real life, I'm a software engineer, which is actually a common path for our blog staff for some reason. I got into transit and started writing for the blog in 2007. I took over the editor-in-chief duties in 2009, and I've been here ever since.
Is that how short our introductions are supposed
Well,
to be?
I was expecting them to be a little bit longer, but that's okay. We'll get into lots of discussion about what you guys do and things like that. So.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, I know.
How are you? Me too. I've been up since 7 a.m. blogging in my pajamas. And because
we're in the basement, so we should all have our pajamas.
That's what bloggers are supposed to do. And then I dressed up for the panel with these guys. They're all the experts. I work for The Stranger, which is an alt weekly in Seattle, Washington. How many of you are from Seattle? Are you all familiar with it? Okay, so this is a Seattle crowd. And how many of you work? No, you're not part of the Seattle crowd. Did they warn you about us?
I'm coming to learn from you.
I'm the wrong guy to be talking. How many of you work for transit agencies or with government? Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm the enemy. Unless I can be appropriated as your ally, which is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people in government make. They assume that they're sort of at odds with this wily media, especially alternative media. Just a couple things really quickly. I'll sort of divide things into 3 categories. There's mainstream media like your daily papers, a wonderful place to break news, as you know, pretty straightforward reporting. Local papers are going to be light on analysis. There are your blogs where the amount of knowledge that these guys have is incredible, and I could never even attempt to match it. And they almost become like part of a transit agency in processing incredible amounts of information and making sense of it. And Alt Weekly is sort of, if it's used correctly, I think, basically like swinging a hammer at a door that you need to blow open or a politician who's in your way. A couple examples. In 2008, we did an endorsement of Barack Obama. Everybody cared about Barack Obama. We knew that Barack Obama was going to win in Washington state and that the stranger's endorsement didn't matter much. So in our Barack Obama endorsement, we included in the middle of it a 400-word endorsement of Sound Transit too, because, you know, it was our paper and we can do what we want. You wouldn't see that in a lot of news outlets. Nick Licata, a Seattle City Council member who is progressive on social justice issues, is not progressive on capital investments into transportation. In fact, he's downright conservative. He thinks it costs too much, and he says it's just a matter of the timing. And given that he's been in office for 4 terms, apparently the timing that he means is like in 100 years from now, long after he's gone and all of us are dead. And so, you know, we attach that around his neck. One of the pieces that I'm working on, or I need to make time to work on it, is a piece about what it will take for the city of Seattle to take the lead on building rail within the city limits without necessarily waiting to get permission from every single outlying transit agency and every local government. That scares the bejesus out of a lot of people, I understand. But Seattle, we've got the votes, and we know from Sound Transit too that there's basically nothing that you can put on the ballot that people are more excited about than rail in the city of Seattle. So how do we combine the fact that we are a wealthy city, the fact that we've got this motivation, and we have an incredible need to connect people without sending transit through stoplights with buses that drive everyone absolutely crazy. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it. There might be federal money for it, but on our city council, we have 3 of the most feckless, timid people in the way. We have Sally Clark and Tom Rasmussen and Richard Conlon, who give plenty of lip service to transportation and absolutely refuse to get off their ass. But I think that if we can show that there's the voter enthusiasm and there's the money and there's the need, and we pinpoint these 3 people as the obstacles, then an incredible amount of pressure is raised on them. And the alternative media can do that in a way that I think that just blogging platforms and dailies can't. And one of the questions that Jeff asked us beforehand is, you know, when you go to bat, when you go to war, do you lose credibility? Maybe you do. I mean, I think that The Stranger has compromised its credibility. People email us every day about how we've lost all of our credibility. Magically, somehow, though, it wells up overnight because the next day people let us know that we had all of this credibility that we'd somehow squandered just with the latest thing that we wrote. So, you know, there are benefits, but I think that in wielding alternative media, that's the lesson for government. If you need pressure put somewhere, if you need an activist who, you know, is fighting transit-oriented development, absolutely blasted, or a politician motivated to move, or people to call that person, alternative media is a tool that everyone should not be afraid to use.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Patrick. I'm Media Relations and Public Information Manager at Sound Transit, and I guess that makes me the odd duck this morning amid these writers. I've been at Sound Transit for, it makes me feel old to say it, but coming up on 11 years, and over that time I've seen a lot of changes in the media landscape and sort of witnessed the rise of, you know, somewhat of alternate media, especially the Seattle Transit blog. And so I guess my role here this morning is to share some insight on how we've worked with these outlets, and I'm happy to be here.
Cool. So one of the things that I've noticed since 2006 or something when I started my blog was that this incredible community has grown up around you know, urbanism, transit planning, cities, parks, et cetera, around the country. And every city has their own blog. Every city has their own place where people can go and talk about these issues. But I've noticed that over time that, you know, in addition to places like, you know, New York, which has a Streets blog, and DC, which has Greater Washington, that Seattle was kind of a star in this bright star in this universe, a galaxy of blogs. And one of the things that I noticed was how many commenters they got, how much interaction they got, as well as just how incredible the content was. And so I wanted to ask these guys specifically, like, how did you guys get to where you are? Because there's a lot of places that have started and not necessarily gotten that far. So, I mean, I guess I'll start with Matt and Martin, but I appreciate the views of everybody else. But how did you guys get to where Seattle Transit Blog is the go-to place in Seattle to talk about these issues?
Well, Dominic, I'm usually the one that has to throw the grenades on these kinds of panels, but it seems like that mission is covered. But to answer your question, to be honest with you, there's a tradition point when a blog becomes not just someone's personal hobby that his friends read to being out in public, and how that happened in STV's case is actually mysterious to me, because I was one of the early discoverers of that didn't know our blog's founder, Andrew Smith, when it was just really his personal blog. But in terms of why our comment thread is the way it is, I think there's a lot of reasons. One is there's a lot of things to argue about in Seattle, much more so than other places, because our rail system is so, it's still in its infancy. I mean, in New York City, the subway lines are laid out. They're building one more, I guess, but essentially, things are where they are. The density is in there. We talk a lot about land use, and those of you who spend a little bit of time in the city know that a lot of it is zoned single family, which is an anachronism for most major American cities. So there's a lot of room to have more development, and that's obviously a very emotional issue that people are passionate about. And the other thing, to the extent that that anything we've done has made our comment thread good and productive, I think it's probably the fact that we have a moderation policy. My eyes pass over, not to say I read every comment, my eyes pass over every comment.
You don't read every comment? I'm crushed.
On our RSS feed, so I'm one of those people that's keeping these things alive, I guess. And we have a policy on things that are acceptable and not acceptable, and it's fairly genteel, I suppose, in terms of what we allow and what we don't allow. We don't try to screen for any sort of ideological content, but yeah, I mean, when people are just launching all sorts of attacks and so on, personal attacks, then we edit that out. And it's not that laborious to do, actually, because after a while it polices itself. And we also have, we have a comment policy on our website, and it says, one of the principles is arbitrary and capricious moderation. Mm-hmm. So, like on Tuesday, that comment's going to get through, and on Wednesday, it's going to be moderated. And it's based on our judgment on how it's going to affect the comment thread, if it's going to hijack it, if it's going to create a lot of unproductive discussion.
So you guys also get, I mean, the thing is that you might not get a huge amount of readership, but I feel like a lot of leadership reads it and thinks it's important to, read it every day. And I feel like there's a lot of places where that's not necessarily the case. And so, how, maybe the outsiders can say, but how did it get that way? I mean, you said that, I know you said you didn't really, you weren't there at the beginning of the inception, but it's just interesting to me how that kind of happened, in the sense that it's kind of a small group of guys, and the comment, there's how many readers do you get a day approximately?
Unique visitors per day is about on the order of 3,000.
Yeah.
And we'll get about 10 times that in a month in terms of unique visitors.
Right, so it's not like the millions of people that go to the Huffington Post or anything like that, but you have a lot of, not power, but just influence, in the sense that you guys write stuff and people pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few reasons for that. Part of it is there's certain people that just really agree with us about things, and it's, although it's not the most intellectual pursuit in the world, if you tell people what they want to hear, I mean, that will bring eyeballs. But I think also, I've really tried hard to find people that can write with deep technical knowledge and dispassionately about details of details of transportation planning and zoning, and I think that attracts a lot of influential people, as you say. I mean, I don't have any data to support this, yeah. but I like to classify our readership into three groups. One is transit geeks like us, and those people are great, and those guys will populate a lot of grassroots movements to make things better. A second group is government, people in agencies and in transportation-related political positions, and there's a couple of mechanisms there. Number one is sometimes we have good ideas. I'm actually naive enough to believe that they're people in the political apparatus actually interested in good ideas and not just short-term political gain. So to the extent that we can provide those, I think that's helpful. And also people like positive press coverage. And I think we're big enough that we qualify as press in some sense, and people like to have good things written about them and don't like bad things to be written about them. And then the last avenue of influence, I think, is our other readership is media, people like Dominic. And we will break stuff, we will analyze stuff at a very low level of detail. And that will inform non-specialist people, both in alternative media and in the quote unquote mainstream media. And they'll occasionally pick up a story and give it a lot of attention. And that's always, it's usually good for our cause.
Yeah.
So one thing I would add, you're talking about why Seattle has done so well. I think part of it might not, I think obviously we had a part of it, but I think a part of it's just the atmosphere, and that we have all the commenters we have a lot of people who are very technical, who also want to dig into the numbers. So we put up the numbers, we do analysis, but then they want to tear it apart too. And that's, I think, it's just part of this. I mean, we have meetups, we have semi-regular meetups, we have a lot of tech people that follow the blog. And so I think that's part, our comments, our threads are sometimes as informative as our articles. And we're lucky in that. And I think that's kind of maybe a Seattle specific thing, in that we've got this big online, social media, technical kind of, we've got a critical mass of those types of people. And that's how I found STB, was on another technical blog that then linked to it. And that when you've got all these linkages among multiple blogs and your Twitter and everything going on back and forth, sharing articles, it kind of helps. I think that's part of it, is just the atmosphere that we exist in.
Yeah.
I guess I'll throw a grenade. I mean, part of the reason I think that Seattle Transit Blog has done so well is because so much of the mainstream media that reports on this stuff sucks, right? I mean, the Seattle PI used to be in print and have a team of reporters that went out and looked into this stuff, and now the only person over there worth reading is basically Joel Connolly and occasionally Levi. Joel, who I love, is absolutely awful on these issues. I mean, the man never saw a strip of asphalt he didn't love. And I've gone on road trips with him on that asphalt, and it's quite nice. But the Seattle Weekly has atrophied into a shell of its former self. There used to be fantastic reporters. I think actually, fortunately, they're on a bit of an upswing right now, thank God, which is really good for Seattle's media environment. But there's been this, I'll also add that KUOW's, a lot of their political conversation programming, I mean, like Steve Scher is a very nice man, but his show has sucked for years. I mean, there's no question that can't be simplified to the point of just stupidity while he's on the air.
This is NPR he's talking about.
Yeah, it's an NPR affiliate. He's a good man, but not a great interviewer. So, there's all of this oxygen in the room that's ready to be taken up, and Seattle Transit Blog has done a fantastic job with that. And when it comes to framing an issue, I think it's incredibly valuable what they do. And you can frame by sort of like writing about things with your sort of political, hammer and sickle, and say what you want to say. But even more importantly, I think that the people who break a story, especially when they're very informed on an issue, they decide what facts are relevant to a story and what facts aren't. So something can be picked up by the Seattle Times, and that's when it blows up, and then the TV stations will air it if it's something that can be depicted visually. And if they get that story and someone has not determined what the relevant facts are, you're left to a jack of all trades, or someone like Lynn Thompson, who will basically write whatever the city council tells her to write. When it's broken by someone like Martin, who decides these are the financing factors, this is the timeline that we're dealing with, these are the political situations that are relevant, that will carry through all the way up the chain. So I think that if it's a big enough story, people aren't going to ignore it just because someone else broke the story, but the way they report it all the way up absolutely is framed by what informed people like Martin are doing.
There's a lot I could say about the success of the Seattle Transit Blog. I think what I might do, though, is go back to when the blog was created. It was in the context, as those of you who live in the region might recall, of a big debate in the region about the future of mass transit. There was it was Sound Transit 2 ballot measure that ultimately passed in 2008 following a failure in 2007 of a larger roads and transit package. And that was a time period where there was a minority, but it was a vocal minority of people who were out there saying all kinds of things about the merits of mass transit. And I think the reality is that with the mainstream media, the culture there, and the amount of space they have, and there was a tendency, not always the case, but in many cases, a tendency for coverage to reflect sort of a he said, she said thing. The pro-transit people say this, the anti-transit people say this. Well, what I think distinguished the Seattle Transit blog and what made them, a vital force in, shaping that debate was they didn't let the transit opponents get away with that. They went in depth. They looked at closely at issues, debunked things, and there were a lot of things to debunk. Believe me, and I think that sort of, to me, that sort of defined their character and their identity in a way that was really powerful for people who wanted to see more transit in this region.
Yeah. So last year we heard that that sometimes public agencies can be a bit hostile to the bloggers or to alternative media or to those who aren't like the mainstream media. How should public agencies embrace this kind of open debate that pops out, when sometimes they're being attacked or sometimes they actually feel like they're being attacked when they might just be, criticized constructively. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I guess it's a question for you, Jeff.
Okay.
How can public agencies and bloggers get along?
Well, I do remember your panel last year where it seemed like there was some antagonism between public transit agencies and bloggers in some communities. That hasn't existed here, and I'd like to think that one part of it is because, it's we view the role of a writer, whether they're mainstream media, alternate, or blog, to ask questions, and we view our role as to answer questions. And I think that tends to keep us on the good side of a writer because it's showing them due respect. And in many cases, Seattle Transit Blog is writing really positive stuff about us. And same with The Stranger, as Dominic mentioned, back in the Sound Transit 2 period, they were extremely supportive of us. So that's always great when you're doing media relations to have supportive writers you're dealing with. But in other times, they've had different perspectives. And I think the public agency role is to kind of grin and bear it and to respect their prerogative to ask hard questions and recognize your roles to answer them.
Go ahead. Well, I think on our side, just a personal ethic that I have, that hopefully if someone reads Seattle Transit blog for a long time, they pick up this theme, is that bad design decisions happen. But it's not because the people at the agencies or in the government are malicious or stupid. There's actual constraints that feed into these things. And I think a lot of internet commentary is, these fools, how could they do this? What are they thinking? And I think it requires a little subtlety in writing, but you want to say, look, this is happening, we think it's bad. Here's why it is happening. Here are the real obstacles to good things happening. And really, that depersonalizes it a little bit, which I think is probably helpful for a constructive relationship with agencies and government officials. And I think it also increases people's understanding of what the real obstacles are to good things happening.
Did you have something?
I'd add one thing is, as mentioned before, we were founded as kind of a advocacy in the beginning to push for that. And I think that also informs a lot of times instead of this is what Sound Transit's doing or this is what Metro's doing and it's so stupid and blah, 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 we come from it, this is what they're doing, this is how we should apply pressure. And so instead of just attacking them, we recognize that there's another side pushing and that we've got to, so we kind of take it upon ourselves and saying, what did we do wrong here? Why did we not get enough people to push for this reorganization or whatever, we want this station here. So instead of just attacking them for not putting the station, I think we say, okay, this is our next meeting. Everybody come out, tell them that you want the station here. And I think by making ourselves part of the solution instead of just attacking the problem, I think it kind of creates a better relationship.
Everybody wants to break big news. If you want to be a writer's friend, give them news. One of the weird things that happens if, like, you're walking around City Hall and you're looking for stories and you ask people what's going on, basically everyone working there will be like, oh my God, nothing's happening at all. What do you mean? And then you sit there having a Snickers bar, and they're like, but can you believe that Sally Bagshaw tried to kill Richard Conlin's puppy last night? And you're like, oh my holy cow. She did what? To whom? That didn't actually happen, for the record. Just using that as an example. No puppies were harmed in this panel.
I'm going to break that story.
Usually issues that are have some dirt in them, a little bit of scandal, maybe malfeasance, maybe something heading the wrong direction, new data coming out. These are really interesting stories. And if you know the person that you want to break it for maximum impact, try to give it to them early. If there's a writer that you have a hostile relationship with them, keep that enemy closer. If things are turning a way that you don't like in their media coverage, obviously that's going to happen. Unless the person's a total scumbag, you can speak off the record to them. Bloggers are online constantly. Shoot them an email. Here's my cell phone number. Can we talk really quickly, completely on background? Explain an issue. If a writer doesn't have more information, they just have the most superficial version of a story, then they have absolute license to savage you. And, sometimes that superficial information makes it look really bad. Even if you provide things on background, even if you're not quoted, or even if you can just add information that they have for context, the sort of coverage that you get after that can change radically. So it's not just a matter of sort of putting your head down and bearing it. Engage directly with that person. Call them. Go out for coffee if you need to. One of the things that writers need, bloggers in particular need, is they want the credibility of big names. And one of the things that I've done quite a bit at The Stranger on our blog Slog is allowed people to write guest op-eds. Is there a head of your agency? Is there a politician you work with? Talk to the blogger who is absolutely going after you and say, hey, would you be interested in a guest opinion editorial from our side that explains, a different angle on this? You can write anything you want, but this would just be our chance to reach your readers, and it would increase the notoriety of your blog by adding that name. They're crazy if they say no, because it's free content.
Yeah.
They want the hits. They want the name. They want to be the place where the conversation is happening. So
Let me reinforce that. If you're a public official and you want to submit something to Seattle Transit blog that's even remotely about transit and land use, I will print 100% of those because I think it's a great public interest.
And what Martin's saying is come to Dominic first with that offer.
Yes. Only if you want readers.
The only thing that I would add is that government writing an op-ed might be one of the most boring things that has ever happened in the history of all time. It can be squirrely and mewling, and the language is florid and pompous and bureaucratic and awful. Don't do that. Good English is concise and it's to the point. You don't need to call the people that you're fighting a bunch of fuckwads. But you do need to make it really clear up front what the news is right now. I'm going to repeat that. If you're writing an op-ed, repeat what the news is up front. We do not want potted history of 1,000 things that happened a million years ago that lead to a logical conclusion today in your last sentence, because that's not how news works. Write something urgent and write something pointed and write about who is right and who is wrong and what needs to happen, and readers will love it.
So if I can just add one more thing to that.
Are you going to try to ask for the scoop next?
No, on this sort of writer's guide advice that Dominic's offering. One other thing is, I don't know that I don't speak for any generation or anything. I was born in 1976. I grew up with spin from when I was a little kid. Watching the news, people spin stuff. I think people my age sniff that, and when everything is awesome and everything you did was the right decision, and all your enemies are horrible. Like, we sniff that as insincere and really inauthentic. And you can be like a little bit honest about what you think about stuff. And I know that's the PR people, you know, that gives them seizures because you're not controlling the message. But I think people in that demographic appreciate that kind of sincerity, and it's a more effective message.
Well, I think something that's happened in the blogosphere a lot is that people, you know, a way to get readers is just to be honest with your readers about what's going on or what you think is going on. And if you don't sugarcoat things, and if you're honest about, well, this is wrong, but this is right, then people will actually give you more credibility in that sense.
And that's not cost-free. I mean, people in different generations, I think, react differently. And yes, when you say this went badly, a hostile news source is going to blow that up into, you know, Sound Transit admits X was a disaster, when, you know, that's not really the message. So there's dangers, but I mean, you know, there's no free lunch. And if you're going to appeal to that demographic and be viewed as something more than just a bunch of spin, then that's kind of a price you have to pay.
I got free lunch today, I think.
Why does it smell so good? Is there a barbecue in here? It's like a hibachi under one of these chairs.
Probably next to the kitchen.
Can I just add one other thing? When you talk about breaking news and giving news, the great thing about a blog is that you can fill the entire internet with your blog if you like. And the internet loves pictures. And a lot of government agencies produce lots of renderings and interesting images. Sometimes sending something like that can just be candy. It might not be the most informative thing in the world, but when you have things like that, give them to bloggers you like, and they'll eat it up.
I think we're just going to run over all these other questions, but
No. I was going to ask.
While we're at it, so
This is a fluid
okay.
panel. It could
So
go
in terms of you know, quote unquote mainstream media, you know, that's got its own issues, of course. And then there's organizations like The Stranger. They've been around for a long time.
Organizations.
They're paid. Well, I mean, you're a corporation too. Should I call you that? But the point is, those are paid journalists. They are going to City Hall, getting the gossip, and that's great. And that's an important function that we will never duplicate. But you know, if you want to facilitate organizations like Seattle Transit Blog in your jurisdiction, put stuff online. Look, we all have real jobs. We can't hang around City Hall all day. And so, yeah, I mean, if you can get, if your meeting is going to be at 2 o'clock, that's, you know, when people want to be there, and we're not going to be there. If you can live stream it, you know, I'm still at work. I can't watch the live stream while I'm supposed to be working. But if your meeting's video is archived in the next day or two, rather than a month and a half from after it happens, then I might watch it like that night or the next night and be able to write about it. And, you know, so I think volunteer blogs and things like that can help illuminate technical details of things that governments want to know, but we will never have that role that paid media has of uncovering that which does not want to be discovered.
So I can ask like a million more questions, but I want to open it up to everybody else because I know that you guys are going to have lots of them. So I'm going to actually, so this is being recorded, so I'm going to give you a microphone. So hopefully this works. Okay, he's going to tell me.
Hello, Mike, 1, 2, there we go, okay. I'm seriously old.
You don't look it.
When I was a kid, there were 5 daily newspapers in San Francisco, and there were 2 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. Now, in my town, we had a couple of really good bloggers, and one of them ran for one of the transit districts and is now pretty busy, and the other one sort of dropped out. And there's a question in the whole blogosphere of any kind of continuation and permanence. And Seattle Transit Blog seems to have done that better than anybody in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. So it's sort of curious. I can go on about alternative media.
Yeah, so this is the thing that keeps me up at night about Seattle Transit Blog is recruiting. So first of all, you have to, okay, so there's a couple issues here. So our staff is basically divided down the middle between basically a bunch of software guys, this is Seattle, and that's what people do, and transportation professionals. And so let me address both of those kind of in order. So first of all, for transportation professionals, the biggest roadblock we've seen is sensitivity to employees of consultancies, of public agencies, writing on the side about these issues, like a very conservative, control the message sort of attitude. So I have several people on staff that work in these organizations, and you know they really can only write about incredibly innocuous stuff or stuff that's in Idaho somewhere, and that's a real shame. That really makes it hard to fill the content hole, and it really hurts our ecosystem because they're very, very talented people. In terms of the other side, the people that are elsewhere, I mean, this is a constant challenge. I find that people burn out. I'm kind of an exception, I guess. I'm not sure what's unique about me, but you have to be a little crazy to put this much of your personal time into this for no appreciable gain, and so you want to find those people, but obviously you don't want people that are too crazy that have various problems that will make them bad writers. And so it's always a balance, and we're always on the lookout for talent because we have to continually refresh the pool. People will come and they'll write wonderful stuff for 2 or 3 years and just kind of have said what they want to say, or they get frustrated with how slow things go. But yeah, I would say that the secret is to be just continuously focused on bringing new talent, encouraging them, getting guest posts from anyone you think that will write one that is of decent quality. Occasionally going into because we have good comment threads, we'll occasionally go in and find commenters that write incredible comments. So, you could write posts. And then really the other issue is, again, how willing, how able transportation professionals are to write on the side without running into tons of conflicts of interest and artificial work restrictions.
Journalism is activism. The pay is so horrible for what you're doing, for the number of hours you put in. It is by nature a sacrifice, whether it is your full-time employment or if you're a volunteer. I make, at the age of 36, having worked at this news outlet for 5 years, less in an 80-hour week than I did doing a 30-hour week waiting tables when I was 21 years old. I could be making a lot more money doing almost anything else. Obviously, not having money can make or break one's ability to be an activist, whether it's journalism or working for Greenpeace or what have you. But people can be very resourceful about where to get money. And sometimes people will help them out, or they'll work 2 jobs. I was a marijuana legalization activist also for a long time, and I waited tables at night and was an organizer during the day. You figure out places to get money, but there's one thing that is absolutely irreplaceable, and it's something that can only come from the community, and I think it's the driving force for people, whether they are campaign activists or writers or what have you, and that's recognition and appreciation. People will invest so much time and energy to assemble the facts, to tell the true story, to talk to everybody, to really understand what's going on, to sit there with their eyes open in bed at night and just sort of toss around the analysis until they feel like they really understand an issue, and then revise something until they feel like they've really explained what they've come to realize. If you're in government and there's a way to recognize people who have done that, I think that can be invaluable to people in helping them be willing to continue to do what you view to be valuable journalism. You don't have to praise them effusively or say that they've done everything right or never missed a fact. But if there's if Sound Transit were to somehow formally recognize the work of Seattle Transit Blog, maybe naming some of their best writers, give them a thing, say something on a web page, I feel like that would give people the drive to keep going a couple more years.
Or it might dare them to get tougher with us. But in any case, this is kind of a question for the Seattle Transit Blog folks, and because it hasn't been mentioned yet. One thing from my vantage point that might be part of the STB secret sauce, if you will, is that it seems like there's a very strong community of the bloggers that you facilitate, and that's been a big part of your continuity. You guys do meetups, and so there's actual places where the bloggers come together face to face and debate stuff. It's a little bit of a community that helps sustain it. It seems to me.
Yeah, we do try to not be disembodied voices on the internet. We get together for breakfast probably once a quarter, and more often for people that are interested. And the blog gets a tiny amount of advertised revenue, so it's a chance to kind of reward people just buying them breakfast every now and then. And then yes, we do have meetups, which we haven't done one in a long time actually. But for about 5 or 6 years, we were in the habit of saying, okay, readers, come out to this bar, and we're just going to hang around and talk transit. And in many cases, we've had public officials come and address the group, which has its strengths and weaknesses. But yeah, I think that actually is another thing that helps our comment thread. I think it tamps down a lot of the real nastiness because you've met that person. It actually makes a real big difference. And something I didn't mention when we were talking about moderation. So I think face-to-face contact, especially for a local blog like this, is very doable without a ton of administrative overhead, and is very valuable.
I'm a blogger, but I'm also a public sector employee. I work for one of the suburban jurisdictions outside Washington, D.C. in the planning department. And one of the issues that I think we have in this particular jurisdiction is that while we have a great blog with a lot of great coverage on D.C. and on Arlington and some coverage in the suburban jurisdictions, there's not as much coverage out there. And I want to disabuse people of the notion that while the mainstream media may be failing us in a lot of cases in transportation, especially in land use, especially these days, when that vacuum is created, Seattle Transit Blog and other blogs have filled that vacuum in a lot of cases, but that vacuum gets filled other ways when blogs don't cover that stuff. And so as a public sector employee, what I've noticed is there are older, like I don't know, from the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, there are older, and maybe even earlier, older methods of getting your message out. And when blogs don't fill it with the right with the truth, capital T truth, there are other methods, in particular neighborhood groups who have listservs and mailing lists, like actual snail mail mailing lists, and flyering campaigns, and they will go out and they will put out misinformation, whether it's on purpose or whether it's by accident. That information gets out there, and it makes it really, really hard for us to do our job. And so I'm not sort of making encouragement, I sort of want to get your reflections, but I know that one of the problems that we have is coverage in the suburbs, and that's where a lot of these battles are being fought, because in Washington, and I'm sure it's the case here in this Washington, in Seattle, that the suburbs are where a lot of the change is going to happen. A lot of the work's already been done in the city. Yeah, we can stripe some bike lanes, and yes, we can do bus stop consolidation, but the hard work is in the suburbs, and that's really where the blogging vacuum is. It's also where the mainstream media vacuum is, but in the other case, the other place, it's where those older groups are really strong, and they're not all bad. There are a lot of great neighborhood groups out there, but a lot of times one of the big battles we have is fighting misinformation. That people come to a meeting and say, we're so upset that the planning department is doing this, and we say, well, we're not doing that, but we can understand why you'd be upset if we were. But once that information's out there, it's impossible to fight.
It's interesting that you say a lot of the work in this is in the suburbs. We actually have, in many ways, an inverted relationship here because we have such a large single-family housing stock, and there's also a tinge of, in my view, a sort of a misguided social justice liberalism that instinctively sides with the little guy who's actually a wealthy single-family homeowner against the big developer, and that doesn't work in Bellevue across the lake. And so it's actually very easy for them to have large up zones, which of course is a big part of the problem, whereas in Seattle this is actually a much bigger fight around stations and so on. But I think in terms of the suburban news gap, I think this is an example of what Dominic was saying about just submitting op-eds. I mean, if you're an official in a smaller suburb of Seattle, send us something. If it's big news, send it to the stranger. And I don't know how much suburban coverage or what your threshold for interest is in the suburbs. But I mean, if it's a boring technical piece about bike lanes, send it to me. I'll print it. So I think these although we don't have that many people that live in the suburbs, and so it's not intimately felt by our staff, and so we don't write about it a lot. And also a lot of it is frankly focused on cars, so it's also not of interest to us. If there's stuff in this space, we're interested in it, so please let us know. We will at least print your stuff, if not report, or you can send us a bunch of materials and we might print on it. We had enough money put together to hire an intern last summer, just for kicks basically, and I sent him out to look at upzoning proposals at all these suburban areas. Tukwila, which is immediately south of here, there's this huge mall surrounded by a giant parking lot, and they have this big plan to redevelop it into something we would all know and love. And I would send him down there just to kind of find out what that was about and write about it. We're interested in it. We just, in a volunteer organization that does stuff at this level of detail, we just need someone to be passionate about it to go write. And if you're passionate about it, submit it to us.
There are a couple really good government-run news blogs locally. One of them is the SPD Blotter, and they'll write up crimes information as it's happening before reports are ready, and that ends up being the sort of touchstone news source for the police. I mean, it may as well be another newspaper. It's put out by the government. They actually hired a former Stranger reporter named Jonah Spangenthal Lee to be one of the writers for it, and also to do comic punch-up writing in it. And not only is that useful to the general public, I think it actually protects the SPD's ass a lot of the time, because reporters who would dig deeper, demand original source documents, maybe find things that didn't look so good for the department. That never happens. They just work off of the blotter. Also, a blog that I love, I believe it's called From Our Corner. It's the Secretary of State's blog down in Olympia. And they have a guy, used to be the chief of the Olympia AP Bureau down there, Dave Ammons. And when he sends a press release, he'll also send essentially what is a version of, a link to a blog post that is essentially kind of like a version of that press release. But their blog breaks news. It's the place where you find out what's going on with initiatives and all sorts of election-related stuff. They do a fantastic job. In your press releases, when you send stuff out to people, you don't all, as a reporter, if I get a press release that I know went to everybody, my immediate instinct is to ignore it, because there are so few reporters that if everyone has it, it's not worth investing my time into essentially rewriting what's already been written. If you've got news or something happened and you think it's particularly up a reporter's alley, shoot them an email that include, here's our Facebook page, our Facebook item on it, here's our tweet on it, here's our blog post on it. Increasingly, the way that people get to media is not because they go to seattletransitblog.com or slog.thestranger.com. They go to Twitter and they go to Facebook, and that's their entry point, and that's where the conversation happens. And I think that there's just as much opportunity, if not more, because it gets credibility, because it comes from a government source, of creating social media. And I know it's such a pompous, overused term, but using social media articles that are created by government that people want to share and talk about, that becomes the entry point to your articles. And so the fact that no local media is covering it is irrelevant if you get to be the one telling the story, and then you get the advantage of framing the message too.
So is this on? So I want to thank you. You sound like an intelligent blog, and it's great to have. I've never seen it, but it sounds like you're an intelligent blog, which we need more of those out there. From Portland, Oregon, with TriMet, and our media has hit rock bottom, and they've started to dig because they're that bad. And so my question for you is, how do you deal with hostile bloggers that are out there? While they may not have readership of thousands of people, they have 6, and those are all the major TV stations and the newspaper, and they go there to get operational issues that we have. Let's say we pass up something that isn't even news, all of a sudden is a VO, on a local TV station, or it's this. It could be a front page story because it's news and it's readily there. So guess my question to you, we try to counteract that in Portland. We've tried to become more aggressive because we have launched a news feed. We're going to do a Twitter feed with just our news. On so many levels, we're trying to get more information out there. We're writing it in story format. So literally, TV news reporters can cut and paste, and we've heard it verbatim on their air. And so how do we counteract these bloggers, the negative bloggers who are out there feeding information to the misinformation too? Because we've even gone toe-to-toe and done fact checks and released them to the media going, what you just saw in the paper was incorrect, da, 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 da. But it's not picked up. And so there's still that misinformation that's being retweeted. So I pose that question to you.
Do you have a thought about that, Jeff? Or do you have a few people to deal with like that?
Well, I guess at the highest level, you know, it's one of those things where the best success strategy is to not mess up, but then when you do, our policy is that you own it. If there's something that we deserve to be criticized for, we'll, you know, basically acknowledge it's something, you know, for us to put focus on addressing. I think, you know, there's no secret, I don't think there's any silver bullet there. And one strategy that you just mentioned is something we do as well. Whenever there's a detailed, you know, hit piece that comes out that, you know, it makes all kinds of false assertions, we'll go through point by point and refute them and then provide that to relevant parties, including key stakeholders and in some cases other media outlets. So that's one thing that we do.
Assassinate the credibility of people who keep doing it. Seriously, call them out. Make an example out of them.
I think our ecosystem just happens to have, through some, you know, mysterious process, been balanced a little bit differently. Where we do have there are hostile bloggers, but I think they're just aren't as loud here for whatever reason. I mean, I would say that this reactive mode that you're in is probably just that. It's reactive, and so you're a little bit behind in the cycle, and getting facts out there faster would be helpful, or preemptively. You know, when there is a mess up that, you know, where it's wrong, but it's so insignificant that it's not a big deal, you release it. That's the first thing that the TV station says. And then when Angry Man says, look what they've wasted $40 on this, isn't this terrible? Then, you know, then they're already primed to say, well, that's $40. What are you talking about? Yeah, I mean, like in the long run, like if you were to develop, well, you can't develop, but if whatever you can do to foster, I mean, some things we talked about getting stuff online and having policies where people in their own time can say what they think, that maybe employees of yours or contractors of yours. Hopefully in time we'll create a more positive block ecosystem that can do that for you. That's what I would say.
I mean, you guys have, I mean, I don't know who the negative people are. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of them, and I've probably read them before, but you have Portland Transport, which is a good, you know, you can get that, you know, Chris is awesome, you can get him information, and then even just like, I guess the Oregonian, are those kind of the negative people too? I mean, if you get them the information early, then how are they gonna, you know, they're gonna be like, oh, well, the kickback, so. You know, at least you have a little ecosystem. Some places don't even have that, so you kind of have a benefit in that space.
Well, what's also interesting is the main reporter at the Oregonian will post his story at 1 in the afternoon, and literally our staff takes from 1 to 5 to correct all the misinformation in the story. Meanwhile, it's already started to retweet. So it's like this battle, and by the time 6 o'clock hits, that's the version that's going to be in the paper the next morning. Because the Oregonian has gone to 3 days, printing 3 days a week. So it's really, really difficult.
So is it not policy at the Oregonian for them to call you before they publish a hit piece on you?
No, it's not.
Interesting. Wow.
We get a heads up, and so then we go into reactive mode, and literally it's also interesting that the headlines of the stories are now search engine based, meaning that, you know, the secret pay raises. So while the story may talk about compensation, that's in the headline on the online version of the story for search engine optimization. Mm-hmm. And so it's this battle against that as well. So.
Can you get someone at like the Mercury to write a takedown piece about the constant misrepresentation of transit by a specific reporter? I mean, in Seattle, we had a problem with certain reporters who were essentially taking press releases from the U.S. Department of Justice every single time there was a marijuana bust. And you'd think that 3 times a week, the federal government had finally stopped the evil scourge of marijuana from infiltrating our fair town. You know, I mean, they were, like the DEA agents were canonized in the press by these people, and you'd never know that they never made a dent in the marijuana market. And there was never any commentary that this was a purely political construction of law, that there's no sort of necessary need for marijuana to be illegal. We just sort of did it one day arbitrarily, and we've been living in this weird system ever since.
What was your standard headline for those pieces?
Stupid fucking credulous hack of the day, colon, and then the reporter's name. And we did this for about a year. And it turns out they really don't like it. And you can dig a little deeper. You can find the facts. You can debunk their argument. You can make the point that in all other issues, something that we did, you would go to the other side to get a fair representation. In these marijuana cases, were they going to the defense attorneys? Were they trying to speak to the suspects? Were they acknowledging the futility of what was going on? In your case, is the Oregonian going to you? Are they examining the facts? Are they looking at the numbers? If they're not, these reporters are stupid fucking credulous hacks. They are. Absolutely they are. No matter whether you are a fairsy, squaresy reporter or you're an advocacy journalist, your job is to represent the issue fairly. You can make your argument, but you need to make your argument against the strongest case that your opposition raises, not some sort of straw man or by not talking to someone at all. I think that coming from a government agency, or if you found a reporter who understood your issue and you were able to assist them by providing a lot of this information, here's what they got wrong, here's what they got wrong, here's what they got wrong. Is this the most credulous hack reporter in all of Portland, Oregon? You would see that person and their editor start to get real sensitive about what they were putting out. After we started to do it, we were stupid fucking credulous hack is a pretty blunt instrument. Not only did it change, not only did we actually start to see these sort of rubber stamp pot articles at the end. However, lawyers representing marijuana issues say that no change has been made in marijuana use or abuse in the United States ever since we began doing it. Quote from lawyer. It's like, holy cow, you're actually doing it. And we started to get emails from reporters, poor reporters, as they would start to find new lines of work because there's no money anymore. They'd be very polite. You wrote a blog post about me a couple years ago, and we were wondering if you could change your blog post because my Google history is interfering with my ability to find work. And even though we're known as being callous and horrible people, which we are, we would take them out of the post because we made the point that we wanted to make, and I think that you could make the same point with transit.
This question's for the Seattle Transit bloggers. As all volunteer writers, how do you guys ensure that groups that are underrepresented get covered in the stories? Women on transit, minorities, people of lower classes?
That's actually a problem area. I can't control who's willing to write for us. We've made several. We'll look around for people that are promising for one reason or another, and we're all male. We are a half minority, I think. So there's that. But I think we definitely come from a certain socioeconomic position, and I'm conscious of that. I would say that our reporting in general is less of a typical, like a more mainstream media style where you're going and talking to man on the street and getting feedback. It's more data-driven, more here's a report, let me break down what this is. So in that perspective, maybe that's, so in terms of our factual reporting, I think maybe we sidestep that issue. In terms of our opinions, I think we definitely come from a certain spot. I think that, everyone has a viewpoint, and I think our dominant viewpoint is probably the car free by choice, frankly. So in our opinions, that has implications, and we often butt heads with with kind of the traditional social justice community here in Seattle, because I think their priorities are different. Now, in some ways, I think some of that is technically misinformed, and our views aren't that different. But the fact is, when it comes to specific policy proposals, there's often disagreement there. And that's what makes it interesting in Seattle, because, you know, in the city, for sure, like, Republicans are not a factor politically. So there's this interesting inter-liberal discussion, and I think we participate in that, and hopefully we do it in a constructive way.
I'm from the Twin Cities, from St. Paul, actually, which is why I say it that way. And I'm with a nonprofit, a collaborative of all the planning districts along the new Green Line that's scheduled to open in June. And we do studies of different issues, and most recently last year we did a study of the walking routes to the light rail stations, which is part of the necessity to get to the transit line. And we really came out with a pretty substantive report, and we tried blogging, putting it on local discussion forums, but the truth of the matter is we're really bad at turning it into news. And the question is, how can organizations like ours do a better job either of doing our own blogging, social media, or putting it onto existing blogs or discussion forums? And getting participation. You know, we would write, but nobody would respond.
I would just, I'm sure everybody, like usual, has smarter things to say than me, but if you give someone an exclusive on something, a reporter, your chance of having that being picked up and turned into news increases, I would guess, exponentially. I would think about the best reporter in your town and say, we have this report, we want to give it to just you, and let you, and if you have any questions, you know, we will walk you through all of the data. And let them know, if you're not interested, we're totally going to give it to insert name of their biggest rival, and let them to have the story, but we want to give you the first shot. And if that doesn't work, then put it online.
Well, I think that's a great strategy, and he knows more about that than I do. The other thing I would say is find somebody who cares. Mm-hmm. You know, the average reporter, I would imagine, probably doesn't care much about pedestrian access, just because it's just not what they do in their personal lives. But maybe somebody has written about this before and is into it. If there are none of those in the Twin Cities, which, I mean, I have no idea, there might be a different organization that's interested in pedestrian issues that has a better social media network than you do, that could propagate it at least through that channel, if not on an actual online news source.
So one thing I was going to add is read the blogs. Read all the different blogs in your field, so then you'll pick up who would be interested in your article, and then you can just send them one. But you know, just a blast to everyone won't get the pickup of, hey, you wrote about this issue 6 months ago. Did you see this? And then also something that Martin brought up is make sure everything's online. In my day job, I ran across a really great report that was done. Somali Community Services here did a report on housing and transportation costs for Somali migrants around transit stations. I found that in my day job, and so I don't use stuff that I come across, and I could not find it online at all. And it was not online. They did not have it on there. And then so I ended up writing the guy from my personal account saying, so I read this really great report about transit usage and housing costs within half a mile of train stations. Can I get this? And he was like, oh, you want that report? No one wanted that. Well, you didn't put it out there. Like, if no one wanted it because we couldn't find it. And then, and then I was able to put it up there. So put everything online and read all the blogs. Know who will be interested in what, and then you can just target them for the specific stories that they would find interesting.
So for the Twin Cities, streets.mn is like the new Seattle Transit blog, like slash Greater Washington. These guys are putting together amazing pieces every day and going through, and they probably have 1,000 hits a day. Just are starting up. It's put together by David Levinson, who's a professor at U of M, and you have those, and you have people like Marilis Harris, in the Twin Cities as well, who's focusing on these issues. And so there's a lot of outlets for you to go to, but you just have to kind of pick and choose which ones you guys think are the best ones to go to. The Twin Cities is great because there's so much, Twin Cities Sidewalks is another blog. So there's there's so much out there, which is awesome because the Twin Cities is doing such a great job as opposed to some other places. So you're lucky, but you got to put it out there too. Yeah, you.
Hi. I was wondering about comment threads. So I think it's one thing to make sure that a blog post or a newspaper article is really well fact-checked, but then there are 1,000 comments that follow that. And I was wondering sort of how active agency staff should be in engaging in the comment threads that follow articles, and or to what extent they should be hands-off about that.
I mean, our comment thread's a cesspool. I mean, it's just, shockingly awful. And there are people who are clearly paid agents who are there to try to attack the credibility of the writer or the argument being made. And then there are people who are just saying crazy things because they have a broader ideological agenda that they think, sort of disagrees with you. I think it is really important for the most informed people to step into our comment threads. We have one of our commenters is, I assume, this is a woman. I don't know why. Maybe the name Crisona writes so knowledgeably about Seattle transportation issues. Crisona just comes in there and busts shit up. And sometimes will take me to task, but also with, presenting facts, making an argument. I assume that this is someone who works for government. I don't know how any private citizen would know all of this unless maybe they work for Seattle Transit Blog.
I weighed in under my own name, actually.
Yes, you do. But I think that there can be so much misinformation and so much misdirection in comment threads. It's really important for people who can speak authoritatively to redirect it. No blogger, I think, would want to admit this, but if you write something and you just get unilaterally slaughtered in comments, even if you know you're right, your appetite to engage that subject again or make that point decreases. There is a member of the city council who was interested in having me write an issue. This was not related to transit. And I wrote this issue and I made this case, and the pushback against it was enormous. This was an issue tangentially related to the Deep Bore Tunnel. And you had a bunch of WashDOT shills go in there, and maybe people from, fucking Parkins Brinkerhoff, like these damn pens, who had a contract to do a bunch of design work sort of related to the tunnel, go in there and try to debunk this argument, with basically personality-based attacks on this city council member. And I spoke to a staffer in that person's office a week later, and I was like, well, a lot of reaction to that proposal. And the staffer said, yeah, that was enough to make me not want to engage with that ever again. So to the extent that people who were really informed on the issue, that would have been working with the various other city agencies and advocacy groups representing it, had gone into that comment thread and changed the conversation and brought it back to facts, I think that the lawmakers' appetite to have advanced this into legislation, the project proposed never actually happened, might have changed the outcome of something that could have potentially been really good for the city.
So our comment thread is I think it's fair to say, is not a cesspool, basically because that kind of personal attack is going to get moderated.
And we don't. We let anything fly.
It's very entertaining, actually. I have an RSS feed for some of their commenters. So, you know, I think that helps some, but we don't fact check comments. That's impossible. And I think people have don't have an expectation that comments are accurate. I mean, I've said incorrect things in comments. Believe it or not, I was wrong. But of course, I mean, now with a post, I think we're very robust about getting corrections out there prominently. With, you know, comments, I'm just shooting out from the hip. I misremember stuff. It happens. I think, yeah, to the extent that the comment thread matters to you, then yes, I think it's absolutely great to inject facts into the discussion and correct things that are just incorrect, and you know, say who you are. You know, Jane Smith from your city's transit agency. This is the fact. I think that really corrects a lot of problems, unless you're just making really mealy-mouthed things that are easy to poke holes in. That'll shut things down quickly. And at our blog, you know, if there's a really substantive response from Sound Transit in the comments, that goes up into the post. Mm-hmm. You know, Jeff Patrick says this is crazy, that this is not happening at all, right? And that shuts it down pretty quickly. So yeah, I think that's very, very productive.
So we're at 11:12, and so there's a question
one
here.
more comment.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
That's, all right, well, I guess the thing I would say would be that you got to take into account that the people reading the comment thread is frequently people that have very strong views on one side or the other, and they're not going to necessarily, you know, in many cases change their views. So you have to, it's a judgment call based on the level of effort. And I think if it's something that's really wrong and concise, you correct it. But if it's just a dog's breakfast of baloney, you know, don't go into some, you know, point by point refutation that's going to take you all day, because you're taking your sights off of more important things.
And luckily for Jeff, I guess, in our case, if it's a completely baloney post, a comment rather, our commenters will take it down. Like if it's that bad, it's going to get rejected by 25 people before Jeff even sees it.
I just want to add one little tiny thing. Sometimes there's a mob mentality, and if you sense that people are just looking to fight, sometimes going in and engaging them just gives them more opportunity. And so you've got to figure out whether or not the temperature in there is such that people are looking to have a cool, reasonable disagreement, or if they're looking for blood. And if they're looking for blood, don't go into the comment thread. Go to the person who wrote the post, get something above the fold.
I agree with that.
Good advice.
One thing I would add, a lot of it was already covered, is I would not respond to commenters. I would respond to ideas. So don't hit reply to this one that's totally wrong, but just write a post of just basically debunking what they said, but just writing the facts. Don't write it as a rebuttal to a person, because then you could be seen as attacking an individual. Just attack their idea, and then just put it at the bottom of everything else. Everyone will eventually read it. And so that's one thing I would say, is don't respond to a comment or respond to an idea.
So we're 11:15. We have 2 more questions, and I have 1 more microphone. So if anybody else has a question, no? Okay, so we're going to go. Oh, okay. So here, and then here, and then here, and then we'll finish up.
So this is sort of a comment toward the agency staffs who have been asking about getting good coverage and things. When we started Greater Washington many years ago, especially WMATA, the transit agency in the Washington D.C. region, did not respect us at all. At least not their press office. I remember Michael Perkins wanted to get information through a HARP, essentially a FOIA request. And for reporters, for media, it's free to get this information, but anybody else has to pay for the staff time to collect the information. And he submitted the fee waiver request, and their press office sent him this form letter that said, "We have read your request, and it appears that you are a blog," right? So no. And I think we've come a long way, because when a couple months ago, we got our first 7,000 series prototype rail car that came in from Japan and was in the Washington D.C. region, the first car, and it was a press-only event. And through a lot of networking with their press office, and they've also changed staffs there, I was invited to the press-only event. I actually took the morning off work and took a camera and had sort of pre-wrote the post, because you can do that when you have a good relationship with the press department or whatever. I sort of interviewed the guy ahead of time, sort of pre-wrote the post, went, took pictures, and then filled in information for the post. And we went up at the same time as stories from the Washington Post and the Washington Examiner and whatnot. And so I think if you're an agency staff member, especially if you're in the press office, but also if you're a blogger, I'd say it's very important to build these networks. You don't just show up one day and say, I'm a blogger, I want to be on the same level as the reporter from the Washington Post. You're not going to get in. You have to build those relationships over time, and that goes both ways. If you're in an agency, so Metro now has a blog called Planet Metro, Plan IT Metro, Planet Metro, and they put out information. And they also sometimes they'll work with us and they say, we're going to release this information because we have more lead time. If you were sending someone to the Washington Post, that's their job. They can do that during the 9 to 5 time they can write a report. We're all volunteer run. We have to find somebody who's willing to write a post. They have to have time in the afternoon or at night to write it. And so if you really want to get your message out there and you have maybe a problematic blogger or a tweeter or whatever, I think it's very important for you to say, we've got allies, but if we want them to be on our side, we have to work with them. And again, it's a two-way street. So that's just some of my reflections. And I'm happy to talk with anyone after the meeting if you want to talk about what some of our trials and tribulations with the transit agency and with other bloggers who are less scrupulous. I'm happy to talk about those.
Yeah, I have a question for Jeff. The standing rule in any organization big enough to have a media relations person or staff, the standing rule is that nobody in the agency or in the organization talks to the media except the media relations people. And I'm just wondering if the evolution of the media environment has made that rule still as dominant as it traditionally has been, or is there any thinking that maybe there are occasions when other people should be able to talk to individual people in the media about substantive issues without handing it off to the media relations guy?
Well, I think the principle we apply is that at Sound Transit, we want the person who's most knowledgeable and credible to speak to the media. And oftentimes that person's definitely not me. It's going to be somebody who's immersed in the subject matter at hand, an engineer, somebody who's immersed in operations. You know, so in many cases, Roger, we do actually try to prioritize that.
But that is all managed and controlled by the media relations person or office, correct?
Well, we try to be, you know, I think the way we try to work is to make it very convenient for reporters to go through us and get them timely responses to their questions, and you know, to make them feel like they're getting their answers. That's our priority.
Yeah, fabulous session, and most of the emphasis was in the technical content and about issues. And one thing I appreciate as a reader from alternative media is understanding who made the decisions. It's about money and ultimately a decision. Who made the decisions? What were their comments? Because I can't be at every city council meeting and everywhere, but I want to know the inside scoop of those decision makers and the decision they made. Just hoping to elicit a comment from the panel.
I mean, it's a bit of a balance. I mean, in some way, one of the great advantages that we have at The Stranger in doing a print edition on pieces of paper, so strange, is that we can go long form. And we can write pieces that are 7,000 to 10,000 words. They take forever to write and forever to read, but you can do a better job of explaining who did what and why it happens. But it's a real balance. I'm not a huge fan, and I'm just speaking for myself, of like people and players journalism. I find that too often reporters tend to be very interested in sort of the mechanics of politics rather than the policy or the issues at stake. That often gets left out, with the exception of people like Mike Lindblom, who was back there somewhere. There he is, Seattle Times transportation reporter, and he's fantastic. If you guys don't know him, I love Mike Lindblom. Anyway. He's good. He's great at what he does.
And there aren't a lot of Times reporters that Dominic would say that about. So.
Oh no, I mean there are some really horrible, embarrassing reporters at the Seattle Times.
So, thanks everybody for coming. Shameless plug, I do a newsletter that I send out every morning at 4 a.m. Pacific. I'm not up at 4 a.m. Pacific, but I send it out at that point, and I go through about 1,000 to 1,200 articles, blogs, etc. a day, and pull out my favorite ones and put them up on thedirecttransfer.com. So if you want it in your inbox, send me an email. It's part of Reconnecting America's kind of services. So I want to thank these guys for being on the panel. This is awesome. I hope you guys had a good time, and thanks for coming. Appreciate it.